This is the Blackout Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Blackout Podcast, where I get to talk to amazing people that do amazing things. And today I'm super happy to have Chris. I need to make sure I get your last name right. Chris Geworsky.
You got it. It's Geworsky or Geworsky, hard or soft G, either way. So
Thanks for coming on today, Chris.
no problem.
We met a couple of years ago when I volunteered for the Fin.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to shoot with your amazing team. I learned so much in the process. I remember you came in actually to the Fin office to talk about how to cover an event. And I learned so much from your presentation. And then just shooting people, like, shooting the event, I learned so much. So super happy to have you here. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here.
A little bit of background. Tell me more about yourself.
So I began my career as a stills photographer, and I started working in the industry a little bit before the digital revolution. I did things a bit backwards than most photographers did. Before I went back to school, I started doing some production assisting for photographers who inspired me in the region. And that would be, David Muir, Janet Kimber, Shannon Henniger. And this would have been in the very early 2000s. What sparked my interest in photography was in the late 90s as a teenager. I did a lot of painting, oil painting, acrylic painting, and I was really interested in exploring the synesthetic connection between visuals and sound. And then when I was 17, 16, a friend of my parents, who is a doctor, told me about his friend who was moving in from Toronto back to Nova Scotia. And he said he was a photographer and did some work for, jazz, like Montreal. I don't know if it was the Montreal Jazz Festival. It was one of the jazz festivals. And he had a piece hanging in his place. And he said, my friend's a photographer. You should meet this guy and see what he does. And sure enough, I did end up meeting this guy. His name's David Muir. He's a phenomenal photographer. And David just said, I'm setting up my studio in my home when I move back to Nova Scotia. You should come take a look at what I do. And I'll never forget it. I went to his studio, saw what he was shooting on medium format film and these amazing images. And I went out literally the same day to a photo store doesn't exist anymore. It was on Blower Street called Reed Suite. And bought my very first camera. It was a Minolta SRT 201. I went across the street to Carsan Mosers and bought a ton of film. And I shot like crazy. And when I got the film developed, not a single picture turned out. Everything was, either so underexposed it was black or so overexposed it was white. So I went back to David and I was like, what did I do wrong? What's going on? And so he kind of took me under his wing and showed me how everything from the basics of photography to the basics of, the importance of communicating a message within that frame and introduced the idea of telling a story within this little box in this window and the importance of that story. And that's what makes good photography is photography that says something. It's more than a pretty picture. A pretty picture becomes irrelevant really quickly. A picture with a message and a picture that makes a viewer ask a question or wonder what is the story or can gather what that story is a successful picture. So, I was this, this teenager, early 20s, hanging out and watching him work. And then he introduced me to a photographer named Janet Kimber, who needed a production assistant. She was a commercial photographer and doing a lot of work in Halifax and New York and Toronto. And then I got to see how, that you could turn that into a career. And I got to see how you could make something commercial still be a piece of artwork. And still be something interesting and relevant. It all didn't have to be boring soap ads, and it didn't have to be stuff that was just based on sales. You could make people laugh with your images. You could inspire people to consider concepts that they hadn't before through imagery. So I started doing a lot of work with Janet, which was a lot of hauling lighting gear, learning the basics of, locations, watching her talk to clients and get work. And then I realized that, as valuable as all of that was, I wanted to go back to school. And I wanted to there were holes in what I was learning. Like, I was learning so much and so many important things. But there were still things that I was kind of little holes in my knowledge, and so I went to NSCAD first for a little bit, and took some photo courses there, and I found NSCAD extremely valuable in teaching you how to use a darkroom, how to process, develop your own prints. NSCAD was great in teaching me how to take an image of something that one might even consider mundane and make a piece of art that expressed something, and make something that actually was worth saying, and with what was available around you. Now, at that time, and I don't want to say anything bad about NSCAD, but at that time, the digital revolution was kind of starting. Commercial photographers were suddenly trading in their 35mm bodies for DSLR 35s, and it hadn't caught up to medium format yet. And NSCAD was a little more, at that time, a little more poo-poo on the technology, and who needs Photoshop? You just learn how to do it right in camera, which is a valuable thing too. Like, I try and get everything as close to on camera before I start the post-production. But I realized that I also, and the other thing that NSCAD didn't have in their bag of tricks and wasn't very strong at that time, was how to turn this amazing skill that they were teaching you into something that you could generate an income off of. And not be a sellout, and still make, beautiful images, but different ways, different ends of the business. How you could do, there are different types of photography that you can zero in and focus on, how to start using that as a trade. And so I went to NSCC, because of my experience at NSCAD. I skipped the foundation year, which when I went through the program was called ACAP, and went right into the photo program. And I did, their photography program. And then I went back for an extra year for the advanced diploma in Photo 2 and digital imaging. And I learned much more on the business of photography. I learned the technology, which is really important. I think NSCAD, when I was going through, was using these big Speedotron boxes, which were good. And we were still using those same Speedotron boxes at NSCC, but we got to learn different, technology was moving forward, and more advanced cameras. The digital thing was a huge thing. They were, the community college was on that. They really had the foresight to know that everything was going to go digital and it was going to change the industry. And so I completed my education at NSCC, and while I was a student at NSCC, I started getting my first actual clients, because I had this advantage that I felt very comfortable through my years of assisting David and Janet. And I was like, okay, cool. I can start to put these things in motion, and I can start to actually try and tackle some clients and try and get some work while I'm going to school to help pay for all of this. So I started shooting for a couple of magazines. I shot for the Coast a couple of times, but that was more for exposure. I started doing some work for a magazine that does no longer exists anymore. 902 magazine, which was my first fashion spread, editorial fashion spread, and first cover. Wow. Yeah, it was a big deal to see that one kind of come out, because there was a magazine store on Spring Garden that had this these big windows, and they just, the day that the magazine was released, they just plastered the window with my cover. And so that was pretty cool to see as a student. And then, you know, kept doing some assisting for a little while too, and started a business partnership with a fellow student. We had the idea that gear and cameras are extremely expensive. So we decided that if we pooled our resources and worked together for the first couple of years, we could accomplish a client list and a portfolio with our combined gear that was professional enough to go out there and give us a head start. And then, how many years did I go through there? A few. A few, yeah. And then, it would have been 2007. I started working on my own and started my own business. And, so now I primarily shoot editorial portraiture. I love images that explore people and their stories. And I talked about that synesthetic connection when I was a high school student. I love the idea of the incredible art form that is visual and music, because music has had a huge impact on my life. And exploring that connection with a camera was something that I loved doing, and I still love doing. And I've made personal projects. Personal projects on the matter, and I've gotten to work in the music industry producing images that explore that connection between musician, music through a visual means, and it's this great thing that I love to explore.
Talking about state of mind, so these two photos are from that. From the book, actually. You want to tell me a little bit of a story, but let's start with him.
Sure. So first, I guess I'll talk about what the State of Mind project was.
Yes.
I realized the value quite right away that in order to, when I started working commercially, I didn't want photography and videography to just become another job. I didn't want to come home after a project like the guy who comes home from work and is just like, oh, I had a tough day and I just, I just want to veg out. Like, I wanted to remain excited about that thing that I loved. And so I realized I had to, on my own, work on projects that kept me interested and inspired, where I wasn't bound by the art direction of a client, which is a very good thing, but where I was in control and exploring something just purely creative for myself. And it went back to that. I love taking a camera and going through the process of examining what music does to a person who hears it, what music does to a person who plays it and makes it. And so I started in... would have been 2006. I had this idea, and it was like, I'm going to take portraits of musicians, and the pictures are going to be of these people. But what I really want to do is I want to kind of explore where they go in their mind when they lose themselves while they're making the music that they're making. Because, when you see somebody perform, playing a show or something, sometimes their eyes are closed, sometimes they're swaying. You can tell they're very present, but they're very elsewhere too. And every person that I approached for the project that said, I want them to go there, knew exactly what I was talking about. But the cool thing is every single person said that was an entirely different thing for them. Like, every experience was so very different. And so what I started to do, it took me 7 years to shoot 18 portraits. And I wanted to take musicians of different backgrounds, different music types, genders, ethnic origins, everything, to prove that this was a universal thing, but to show how different it was to everybody. And even though it didn't matter what your skill level, whether you played your ukulele at the edge of your bed for, you know, that release, or whether you're playing sold out shows to thousands, I wanted both of those people, those types of people, to explore that it is just as valuable and therapeutic and can be used as a coping mechanism in this wonderful release.
Indeed.
And so that's what that's what the State of Mind portrait series was all about.
These are some of the prints. These prints behind us came from this book, right?
Yes, yeah. So there were 18 portraits altogether. And what we did is we tried to capture what that place was when they lose themselves while they're playing. And to do that, it was a lot of talking before we got anybody in front of a camera. And that's why it took so many years to only shoot 18 portraits is, you know, every subject with a lot of phone calls with, a lot of, you know, sit downs for coffees or beers. And the process would be that we would sit down and first I would try and have them describe what that place would be if it was a physical space or if it was a place that we could capture with a camera. And then what we would do is we would go out and try and find these spaces or find means to create these spaces. So for example, this guy here, he talked, his sound is very gritty, kind of grungy, and he talked about like grit and wear, but he also talked about these underlying tones of like opulence and like fanciness, for lack of a better word. And so when you look at this particular picture, we shot it at the Lord Nelson Georgian Lounge, and it was just before they revamped that room, you know, gave it a little facelift. And so you can tell there's some dings and scratches, and it is a beautiful, opulent ballroom, but it's definitely worn a little, and it's, you know, got some wear and tear. And so we got the Lord Nelson's permission to go in and shoot there, yeah, tried to create that with his guitar. And I think we got a few funny looks. I don't know if they understood what we were wanting to do, and then they saw us dragging guitars and amplifiers into the hotel. And
what was the setup here? What kind of camera did you use? Lights?
On that was a fairly early shot. If I recall, that would have been a Canon 1DS Mark II. I would have shot that with a Norman 2000 watt second power pack, and I probably would have had. Actually, I remember the setup now. It's there was one head that was pointing into an octabank, and then there was another one that just had a bit that was shone through a scrim at a lower intensity to give a bit of a fill. Yeah, and there was another shot we did from the same shoot in a different portion of the room where I think we used a third head as just some, you know, just a dead fill in the corner of the room.
On this one?
So this particular portrait I really like because it is very close. It visually is kind of close to what this person talked about that experience being. This she said it was very organic. There was this brightness and this luminance from around them, and it was this connection to nature. And this person grew up around that lake, actually, and spent childhoods, you know, around that lake, exploring as a kid, having fun, and felt like that organic connection to nature and that flowingness of, like, you know, water and the elements were so strong when they were able to lose themselves in their music. And so we actually went to that lake at dusk, and we decided to have the bass guitar cable look like it was plugged right into the lake. We just dropped a cable into the water, and just had that person work at getting to that place. And that was one thing I wanted every subject matter, or every subject, to kind of do, is like the conditions of these portraits are, they had to be in them physically. If they were played an instrument. I would have liked I want that instrument in the shot, and they had to try and get to the place where the photograph was about. Working with Adam, he was very conceptual, and he said, "There's no way we can turn this into an actual photographic space." And he said, "I think of ideas, and I think of concepts, and I think of things that me and our band went through while we were on our first nationwide tour, and I think of our loves and our frustrations and our relationships and our lyrics." And so for him, what I did is I bought a 9-foot seamless black backdrop and a pack of sidewalk chalk, and I gave him the keys to my apartment, rolled it across the floor, and said, "Make whatever you want that symbolizes that." And we used that as a backdrop. And it was very cool to see what he came up with.
Yeah, no, I love the photo. And why did you decide to call it a state of mind?
I think because it's a bit of a play on words. I think you get to a state of mind which is very powerful, and music will alter your state of mind. But it's such a personal thing for each and every individual that I wanted to show how it was owned by the person who went there and owned by that person who decided to let music take them that place. So we went from state of mind to state of mind, because, you know, it's my place.
State.
Yeah, exactly.
It's my state. And that's the thing. So most people that know you for photos and videos, but you actually have a musical background too. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Oh my gosh, where to begin? So both my parents are very musical. My dad was a drummer in many rock bands. My mom, in the late 70s, early 80s, was a classically trained pianist who still has a 9-foot concert grand in her living room. They're divorced, no longer together, but their influences from childhood and onward till today have been very strong on me. And there was a definitive moment when music became a huge part of my life, and I realized that it wasn't just something my parents did, that it had an impact on me and made me want to participate in that. And so it would have been the early 1990s. I had mentioned my parents got divorced. My dad went to live in the small farming community that I was from, and my mom went to live a little closer to Winnipeg. This is in southern Manitoba, which is where I was, born and raised. And I had a tough time as, the early teenager, deciding, you love your parents. You love both you want to spend time with both of them. You have a deep amount of affection for both of them. They're both wonderful parents. I made the decision to, for a couple of years, live with my dad and his new wife, and I was there for a couple of years, and two of my younger brothers lived with my mom, and it was the 93, I think. Mom met and fell in love with her amazing current husband, Ward, and my mom was an ICU nurse. He was a physician, and he got an offer to work in Halifax. And the situation at my dad's house was one that it was filled with a lot of love, and as my mom's, but there was a financial strain there too. My dad had started working as a truck driver. There wasn't a lot of money. I had a new baby sister in that household, and there was another one on the way, and I knew that I was going to be a bit, not a burden. I knew that my presence in that household was going to be felt financially in a very big way, especially going into your teens. And so I made the decision to go with my mom and my two other brothers to live in Halifax. And it was a very tough decision. I didn't want to be away from either parent. I didn't want to be away from either, side of that my family. I love them both. But when I was getting ready, the weekend we were getting ready to move, my dad and my uncle, I think the album was originally my Uncle Rob's, who, spent a lot of time living with us. It was my dad's brother. He gave me this album. It was B.B. King live at the Apollo. And he said, I noticed you like some things with some horns in it. I did. I was into weird music as a kid, like, Frank Sinatra, Harry Connick Jr., big band swing was a thing that I liked. But, just liked it. And he said, there's some horns in this. I think you might like it. And I thought it was a really genuine gift, and I thought it was great. But I was like, this blues stuff. I mean, what is this? I don't. It was a nice thought, and of course I thanked them. And we were in Nova Scotia for a couple of months, and I was feeling really homesick. And I was digging through boxes of the stuff that we'd brought with us, and I found that album. And I put that CD in the player, and I thought, you know what? I'll bet you I would have listened to Dad or Rob listen to this. It would be a nice reminder. And the first tune that came on, it was a song called All Over Again. And the song had absolutely nothing to do with what I was going through. But the sound, the way it was delivered, that tone, like the first note that B.B. King played on his guitar, Lucille, was just this so empathetic and so supportive. And so it felt like it didn't matter that the song had nothing to do with what I was going through. It felt like there was a hand on my shoulder, and there was this empathy, and there was this, it felt amazing. I'd never felt anything like that before. And I was transported, and I remember thinking, how do I do that? I need to figure out how to make that sound, and I want to express myself like that. And my stepdad Ward, who is incredibly supportive and amazing, helped me buy my first guitar and got me involved in guitar lessons. And I had an extremely frustrated guitar teacher because all I wanted to do was put on B.B. King records after that and listen to B.B. King. He was his sound, like every single day throughout my entire teenage years and 20s and into my 30s. And I'd listen to his voice and his sound and his guitar every single day because that music just spoke to me. And I learned how to play listening to B.B. King. And that opened my eyes to other artists like T-Bone Walker, Guitar Slim, Muddy Waters, Lonnie Johnson, and then, going way back, you get curious, where did these sounds come from? You learn about Robert Johnson, and these sounds that were just so amazing by these artists. So, yeah, I started playing, me and my brother Paul both, and I remember the first time I realized I could take myself to that place when I first heard the B.B. King record. I had a really rough day, and I was sitting at the edge of my bedroom, or sitting at the edge of my bed in my bedroom, and teenage angst. you're frustrated. Your hormones are flying all over the place. Yeah. You had a crush on a girl. She doesn't like you. So it's just the way. You got the blues. And I remember I had my acoustic, the one Ward bought me, tuned down to a drop D. And I took a bottleneck slide and I just ran it up to the 12th fret. And I heard that I made a noise that just made me go, holy crap, there it is. And immediately felt great. And immediately had that just amazing expressive, release, and found that I could console myself by making the sounds that all of these idols and my heroes were making. And then, of course, there hasn't been, I don't think, a single day where I haven't picked up a guitar and played. And the goal is always to get to that place. You're chasing that wonderful, amazing feeling. I remember I met B.B. King in the early 2000s, and it was an amazing experience to meet your idol. and it's so crazy because so rarely are the people that we look up to and really starstruck with and really idolize, they're rarely the people we want them to be. They're regular people. And I gotta say, this man was as gracious and genuine and beautiful a human being as you would want. He gave some totally starstruck 23-year-old kid, you know, a few minutes of his time when he didn't need to. And it was very cool. And yeah, so I do play guitar, and I get to carry on the tradition of making music that my parents do.
Wow. Now, so let's go back to photography, right?
Okay.
So you started the studio. How did the thing with Finn happen? So that's the Atlantic International Film Festival.
Yes.
How did that happen?
How did that happen?
Yeah.
That happened in 2008. So my wife, who is also self-employed, she began her career as a graphic designer, and now years later owns a boutique branding agency. One of her first few jobs in the industry, she was the in-house graphic designer for the Finn International Atlantic Film Festival. And at that time, it was called just the Atlantic Film Festival. They were doing some work with a smaller festival that they managed that at that time was called Viewfinders. It's now called Finn Kids.
Yeah.
And the photographer, I believe, that they normally used for event coverage was not able to make it or not able to commit, and it was very last minute. And the marketing and communication manager, who at that time, her name was Kristen Fraser, decided that, asked Brittany if she knew anybody. And she's like, well, yeah, you know, she's boyfriend at the time. We weren't married yet. She said, is a photographer. And they have been a client that I've been very happy to have and been very grateful for. And I'm very happy with how happy they are with my work. And so Viewfinders, I think, was a week-long festival in those days. Yeah, it was even the film festival was much longer back then.
Okay.
And so by myself, I remember I had a small budget. By myself, I ended up covering the entire festival. And then I decided that I wanted to take a very different approach to shooting an event. I wanted to shoot it the way, not like a wedding or not like most event photographers where you're just capturing what's going on. I wanted to go in and actually make little vignettes, little image stories, take 5 different types of shots and tell the story of what's happening and unfolding. And I liked the challenge that these events didn't necessarily lend themselves to that. So you found yourself in precarious situations, and sometimes, you had to really learn how to very gently and nicely annoy someone, and it paid off. They absolutely loved the work. And I submitted it to Kristen Fraser, and they were so happy with it. A week later, I got called back in to speak to, I remember sitting in the office of a lady named Leah Ronaldo, and she said, if we give you a bigger budget, will you shoot the big festival, and what would it take to do something like that for that particular festival? And for that, I'm like, well, I would need a team, and it would start off as a smaller team. I think I hired only 3 or 4 other people, and I said I'd want to get a little budget to take time before the festival to kind of train them on how to look at event capture the way that in a little bit of a different light and a different way. And they were okay with that. And so we produced that film festival photography package for them, and they were very happy with it. And then the next year I was really quite honored and happy to land the actual account for the main image, which was a triptych, 3 photos that were part of an ad campaign in their main image. And that was very cool, because I remember as an assistant, one of the photographers I worked for worked on that account, and it was a big deal. It was run through. When she shot it, it was extreme group. It was one of those things as an assistant you looked up to and go, wow, one day maybe, yeah, and then you find out, holy crap, I'm doing it. Yeah.
Wow, Chris, I'm going to have you back, and I'll make sure you have a guitar so people can actually fucking hear that you can play. But here's my last one. What advice would you give someone that wants to make a career out of their camera?
My advice, ironically, isn't going to focus on business training, although that's essential. My advice to somebody who wants to start a career using their camera is to shoot personal work and shoot work that is fulfilling to them and not client work. And that's twofold. Number one, that's going to keep your passion for what you're doing alive. That's going to keep photography and videography from becoming a job. The second thing that's going to do is that's going to bring you the commercial work that's going to pay your bills. So you can have commercial clients with impressive names and things like that, but sometimes you're going to find that those clients that's not very fulfilling stuff, like a telephone on a seamless white backdrop might pay rent for January, but it's nothing that's going to go in your portfolio. It's not creative. It doesn't, may not speak to you. It'll showcase your skill as a technician. But the thing that will get you that job is an art director calling you up and going, wow, I saw some of your work in a gallery the other day and you shoot great stuff. Or if you knock on their door and go, I'd like to sit and come into your boardroom and show you my portfolio, and they see some work that's really going to shine, is the work that you pour your heart and soul into, which is your personal stuff. And it's going to look great, and that's what's going to attract those people that are going to hire you for maybe, a soap ad or and not all commercial work is boring stuff, but there is a large portion of it that is. But I love editorial portraiture, which is, commercial work, and it's magazine work, and, sometimes you get some really creative stuff coming out of that. But my advice to anybody who wants to use a camera, whether it be a stills camera, a motion camera, whether you want to be a photographer, videographer, filmmaker, shoot your own stuff. Shoot the things that you're passionate about. You're going to shine, and that shine is going to attract the work. That's going to build your career. And then, of course, get to know the actual business end of things, because you don't want to go broke.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, Chris.
No problem.
Like I said, I'm definitely going to have you back, and I'm definitely going to make sure you bring your guitar there.
Yes, I'll bring a guitar next time for sure.
Thanks.
No problem.
This is the Blackout Podcast. Thanks for listening.